But no, we appreciate you joining us. We got a lot to talk about. We obviously already had a game today. I caught up on that one as quickly as I could to try to be up on that. The main thing I want to do with you, though, is talk about the trade deadline, because that was the main kind of order of operations. But then I read an article on thehockeywriters.com that everybody should follow Tony and Devin and crew there, because it's great stuff. But I like the way you approached this trade deadline, because I've told people this a lot in terms of team building across all the sports. The key to improve a team, yes, there's a couple different ways to do it. I feel like the Red Wings had one approach in the offseason, and now you're kind of proposing a different approach in the trade deadline, which I do like the approach. In the offseason, they went for some value, primarily outside of Gibson, some value acquisitions where they were able to fill kind of the bottom roles with like a Bernard Docker. Van Riemsdyk has obviously worked out pretty well, but those guys were all supposed to slot fairly low. What you're looking for those guys is to at least slot in the line in the position that you want them to, and hopefully exceed that expectation. The other way to do it is what you're talking about for the trade deadline, which is go top down and say, okay, we're going to fill in a top six guy and then slot everybody else down and right size the rotation. That's usually the quicker way for success. Obviously, it's usually you're paying more for that asset or what have you, but that's the way to right size it a little bit quicker, because you're not going bottom up, you're going top down. So you had some good kind of proposals and ideas on that concept.
Yeah, in the past, Steve Yzerman has played it pretty conservatively with free agents and with trades. Looking back since he joined the team in 2019, he's only traded a first-round pick once and a second-round pick twice. And the first-round pick was used for the Alex DeBrincat trade, and one of the second-round picks that was used, both of those were acquired from another team. So it wasn't even Detroit's own pick. So, yeah, they've typically gone for value in the past, given their prospects room to grow and, not block them in any means from a higher spot in the lineup. But I do think we've reached the stage in the growth of this organization, especially under Yzerman's guidance, that it's time to start cashing in on those assets. The Red Wings still have a slew of draft picks coming up. The only one they don't have is their second next year, which was used in the John Gibson trade. Other than that, they are absolutely loaded in the prospect pipeline, and not all of those players are going to have a spot on the Red Wings. They have, a ton of depth up front. We've seen how well the Grand Rapids Griffins are playing with Michael Brandt-Nygaard and Nate Danielson and company down there. Most of these guys will play for the Red Wings, but some won't. And if they're not, then you might as well consolidate assets and acquire a top of the lineup player, whether that's a forward or defenseman, to improve your team now. Trading a bit of your future for the present.
Exactly. And I think you hit on a couple good points in addition to kind of that top-down approach. The consolidation of assets is something that not all the teams have the luxury of. All teams can do it, but it's what are you taking from? I know the Hughes trade was obviously potentially a huge deal, and I think they legitimately had some interest, but the problem with getting a guy like that and what it would have required is they were probably looking at guys that were already in the rotation at the Red Wings level, and although you're adding a very high-end piece to the top of his particular line and set, there's a lot of people that you'd be losing throughout that you wouldn't necessarily have replacements for, because those guys that are on the bottom or on the line below wouldn't necessarily be able to move up and provide the same help. So that's why the top-down approach helps, where if you are able to trade guys that aren't necessarily here yet and consolidate some of those assets that maybe are blocked or aren't necessarily your basically playing out their potential with another team, because they've even had to do that at the main roster, getting rid of some guys, Berggren, that just haven't really fit great, and they need to find another home for somebody like that. I like the idea of doing that when you're maximizing the potential value, because I do think there's some pieces. You even mentioned one of the names that I've heard some rumors on. I know people are high on somebody like Nate Danielson, but he's also a guy that seems lost in the shuffle to a degree. Not that he doesn't still have time, not that he can't still develop into a very good NHL player, but that might be a guy that another team can be higher on, and you kind of sell, you buy somebody from another team that you know what the potential already is. The potential has been realized, and you sell future potential with Danielson and a couple other pieces.
That's right. For Danielson in particular, the Red Wings have Dylan Larkin, Danielson, and Marco Kasper down the middle, and it's going to stay that way for the next several years. I know there's also Andrew Kopp and Michael Rasmussen and JT Comfort, but if you're looking at just the younger players in that group, you could potentially have Larkin, Kasper, Danielson, Rasmussen for the next 5 years. Now, if the Red Wings decided, hey, let's include Danielson in a trade for, say, Elias Pettersson on the Vancouver Canucks, well, then first off, you're getting a center in return, but also you're taking out what's your third line center, and that position can be replaced through free agency. Or maybe Amadeus Lombardi steps into that role eventually. Or, in this scenario, Elias Pettersson maybe is your second line center, and Marco Kasper moves down to the third line. Suffice to say, they have lots of depth, and they have lots of options to replace some of that depth if they want to make a move. It's the same case for defense, especially the same case for the wingers. Plenty of talent there behind Lucas Raymond and the younger cohort with Michael Brandt-Nygaard and Carter Bear and Max Plant, who's having an outstanding season at the NCAA level. Dmitry Buchelnikov is going to come over from Russia at the end of his season, another outstanding player. And, of course, Carter Mazer on the Griffins, who is finally looking healthy. And all those players, if they're all on the team, great. But that's a lot of roster spots otherwise. And, some of those assets could be consolidated, and we take two good players or three good players and turn them into one great player. And with that, it makes your team better.
Exactly. And I'm now, they're going to make a move. That's pretty clear. I think they've got a lot of feelers out, and we talked about, the possibility of Pettersson and kind of that center side. I want to talk about the main side that has been the focus all year, which is the defense. That they've been on the verge, it feels like, of making a move for a while. So that I would think would be the other place. But we're going to take a quick break and then come back here with Tony Wolak of the Hockey Writers and talk about defensive possibilities and the season outlook for the Wings as a whole. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Tony Wolak, talking about the trade deadline and the possibilities for the Wings, because I do think there's maybe multiple moves in store here, because we talked about the center realignment and kind of taking some of those pieces, because we do try to cover a lot of the prospect side of things. We have folks here locally that cover the Griffins for us, being here in Grand Rapids, but we also talk to all you guys who cover kind of the international side of things and where these guys all are. You're talking about the guy coming over from Russia, and we've heard about a bunch of the guys kind of at the college level, the Plants and the Augustines of the world. There's a lot of guys in this pipeline, and not that I'm saying trade all of them, but you do want to consolidate some of the pieces, knowing what Yzerman has added, because I know it's taken a while. I know people are a little anxious about getting to the playoffs and the fact that it has taken so long. But what he has done in this time is he's filled what was a pretty barren cupboard before. And so now I think you can start to consolidate some of those pieces. And I do like the approach that I've seen from writers like yourself that they're talking about possible trades. I think the main things that they're looking for is somebody that's not necessarily on his way out as far as his career goes, and has some term to his contract, so they don't have to worry about the idea that they've got to re-sign a guy to a high contract. Maybe it won't work out. Maybe they won't be able to re-sign him or come to terms. But the one piece that has never made sense to me is they have had a clear need for defense ever since last year. We've been talking about it on the show. Pretty much every pundit has come on and talked about the defense. I got to think now is the time to realign those defensive pairings a little bit better and add in some depth here, even if you do still go out and get a center, because I'm not opposed to that. I think I'm now more thinking it might be both moves.
Yeah, starting on defense, I agree. I think there's value in adding depth for the rest of the regular season and into the playoffs and possibly beyond that. The one name that's been floating around over the past half week has been Tyler Myers of the Vancouver Canucks. He's a 6'8" right defenseman. He's played mostly a shutdown role for the team this year. Honestly, he's pretty much had the Ben Sherratt role for the Canucks, mostly starting in the defensive zone, tasked with facing top opponents every night. His stats don't look pretty because of that. If you're on a not so great team and you're given like the toughest deployment, your stats aren't going to look very good. That's just the reality of it. But the Red Wings wouldn't be acquiring him for his offense. They'd be acquiring him for his mean style of play, his shutdown ability, giving them another option on the penalty kill, and someone who can pair with Sherratt late in games. So once Detroit drops down to two defensive pairs, Edvinsson, Seider, and then Sherratt and Myers per se, then you feel pretty good about protecting a lead late in games. Because again, Myers he can play mean. He's a willing shot blocker. Not an overly offensive guy, but definitely someone who could help the Red Wings. Now, he isn't the top name out there, but certainly can serve as an upgrade over someone like Jacob Bernard-Docker, who, to his credit, has been playing pretty well lately. But again, that depth is necessary. You go into the playoffs with 6, 7, 8 defensemen who are going to play. It's not going to be the same 6 guys every night. Injuries will pop up. Something will happen. You need someone who can step in, and Myers gives the Red Wings more depth at that position. Other names that have been thrown out there on defense, Justin Falk's name has been thrown out there because Steve Yzerman and Blues general manager Doug Armstrong do have a history together, but I'm not so certain he's the right fit just because the cost is relatively high for Justin Falk. He's also 33 and is signed for another year. I just would not be willing to pay the price for someone who you're getting for that short a time, and the team that's trading him away is asking for quite a bit in return, like first round pick plus for him. There's a fit, yes, but not at that price. Another name that's been thrown out there is Mackenzie Weegar on the Calgary Flames. Same sort of deal as Falk. A little older, signed for a few years after the season. The team is asking for a very, very high return for him. He'd be a fit, yes, but is it worth the price? No. So if the Red Wings end up with more of a depth piece like Tyler Myers or Luke Shen on the Winnipeg Jets, that's fine. Nick Perbix on Nashville, who they played against today. These are solid players who are role players, but would improve the team nonetheless. I do think if the Red Wings do end up making a splash before the trade deadline, it will be at forward, though, and instead of on defense. That's just reading the tea leaves of who's out there, like what the supply is, and what the Red Wings are willing to part with for high-end players.
I do like the idea. I'm with you on that, and I do like the idea of adding kind of a big-bodied defenseman like you're talking about with Myers. It does feel like, sure, I'm sure they could use a very high-end, top-quality defenseman, but that that top two, they're working well together. You need somebody that slots in below them, and the idea of Myers coming in or somebody like that's blocking pucks, playing heavy. I think that's the style they need, and that's where the game's kind of gravitating. There's a lot of big bodies being thrown around, especially after Florida did so well with their kind of average size being on the bigger side in general, getting a lot of those big bodies in there. So it'll ebb and flow the trends of the game. But I do like the idea of maybe going a little bit more splashy on offense and then just getting some of that depth, because for a team that does have a lot of pieces, it doesn't always feel like they have the depth in the right places. So consolidating some of those pieces that maybe are ill-fitting or maybe you can get rid of and trim from the bottom, and getting some depth in places where it's a little bit more obvious, like the defense. I do like how Bernard Docker has played, but they're kind of leaning on him a little too heavily maybe compared to what the expectation was at the beginning of the season. So getting another body to rotate in as you're making a hopeful playoff run seems like a wise decision.
Absolutely. And again, if the Red Wings are going to make a splash at forward, some of the names that have been thrown out there are Robert Thomas, and I mentioned Elias Pettersson before, but that seems more like an off-season topic rather than something that happens before the trade deadline. Other than those two, even Michael Bunting, who the Red Wings played against Nashville today, is more of a complementary piece for the top couple lines, maybe third line, but definitely provides value as someone who plays a little bit more physical, can be a little bit more mean, win puck battles along the boards. There's a fit for him on the team. Other than that, Igor Sharangovich on the Calgary Flames, him and Nazem Kadri could be fits in Detroit. Vincent Trocheck has been thrown out there as well. All the players that are on the higher end of the talent pool around this year's trade deadline, the Red Wings have discussed to some degree. Now, where they end up, where their offer fits in relative to the other offers teams out there are providing, we'll see what happens between now and Friday. But I can tell you that the Red Wings have done their due diligence. This is their first time buying under Steve Yzerman at the deadline. They are leaving no stone unturned. And from everything I've told, they've had conversations with just about every team about their players. So suffice to say, if something happens, great. If it doesn't get done, it won't be for lack of trying. The Red Wings still need to, do what's best for their long-term approach. And if there's no deal out there, Yzerman's not going to force anything, because that's not going to be helpful for the team next year or the year after or down the road.
That in some ways would be the most interesting result from just kind of a standpoint of how the team deals with it, because that was the big discussion last year, that they didn't make a move. It wasn't for lack of trying last year either. They were working on, I think, that Gibson move and some other moves that then didn't happen. They made the Gibson move happen in the offseason, but you also have to like kind of some of the moves he has made, not only the free agency moves where he's identified Van Riemsdyk and Bernard Docker and guys that have been a pretty good value for what he got them for salary-wise and all of that, even if they do need some reinforcements with Bernard Docker and other guys. But Gibson is looking very good as that 1A goalie and given Talbot finally a little bit of reprieve, except not today, but most days. And so his ability to identify talent is looking pretty good, even in the Red Wings uniforms here. Obviously, he did a good job with a different team down in Tampa, but I do think they are going to not necessarily press, but I do think they're going to be encouraged to make a move, because I know they've been kind of going with the adage of, okay, play your way into being able to make a move. And I think the players have kind of lived up to that. And so now it's on management to say, okay, here, we'll give you a little bit of help for the stretch run.
Yeah, and they have a few more days to get something done. I do think the Red Wings will they'll do something. There's a clear lesson learned from last year, and Yzerman has put it on the team this season to earn their reinforcements. And they've done that. They've had an outstanding season. And even though they're in a playoff position now, there are still needs, and we've talked about those. Scoring help, defensive depth. They have given Yzerman everything, all the confidence in the world to go out and get someone to make this team better so they can finally get into the playoffs. And I do think something will happen before the deadline. It just, at the very least, there will be a defensive defenseman acquired. If they can land a splashy forward, that would be great. But if we're playing conservatively, there will be at least one player brought in, and I'm guessing that's a defenseman.
Exactly. They can go for one of those kind of depth piece guys that you were talking about. But be sure to check out the articles on thehockeywriters.com. There's great stuff on there, trade deadline previews, some of the things that we've been talking about. Be sure to send them wherever else we can here, Tony, the podcast and social media, because I want to make sure people get a good chance to follow you here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's at Tony Wolak on X. Check out the Hockey Writers. I'll also have a podcast called the Flying Octopus Podcast with Evan Sabrin and Devin Little. Been with these guys for about a year and a half now and really love the work we're putting out. So, give us a listen. Next podcast drops Saturday morning after the deadline. So thank you again for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Definitely. Thanks for coming on. And we've had and will have Devin and Evan on the show here too. And we'll have Tony back, but appreciate you coming on, Tony, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Tony.